In 2019, a survey of commercial security operations found that over 70% of night shift guards spend most of their time alone, often responsible for properties larger than several football fields. By the end, you will understand why the popular story about strange security guard rule lists is wrong. People imagine a very specific scene. A lonely guard arrives at a remote building. On the desk waits a printed sheet of bizarre instructions. Never look in the mirrors after midnight. Never answer the phone after 3 rings. Never open the back door if someone knocks twice. The internet loves these stories. They spread quickly because they feel like horror. But the real explanation behind strange rule lists and remote security work is rarely supernatural. Lesser known fact. Large retail complexes and malls often operate hundreds of individual safety procedures, many of them written after a single past incident. The most common belief says these rules exist because something unexplainable happened. A creature in the hallway, a ghost in the elevator, something that appears only after closing time. The belief persists because rule lists look strange when stripped from context. Lesser known fact. Many corporate safety manuals include procedures written decades earlier, sometimes copied from previous properties without rewriting the explanation. When a new guard reads the rules without history, they appear mysterious, but in reality they usually reflect past accidents, insurance requirements, or legal liability. Consider the first myth. People claim a remote mall becomes dangerous at night because something supernatural roams the building. The idea sounds convincing because darkness changes perception. Empty corridors echo, lights flicker. A place designed for thousands suddenly contains only one person. Lesser known fact. Studies of human perception show that low-light environments significantly increase false identification of movement and sound. Security guards often report footsteps, whispers, or movement that later turns out to be ventilation systems or building expansion noises. The missing detail is architecture. Large malls are massive. Mechanical systems, heating ducts run hundreds of meters through ceilings. Metal frameworks expand and contract with temperature changes. Automatic doors cycle through diagnostic checks. Lesser known fact. Temperature shifts of only a few degrees can cause metal beams in large structures to expand enough to create audible popping sounds. Now imagine the first night of a new guard. The building closes. Thousands of shoppers leave. The air conditioning slows. The quiet becomes unfamiliar. A bang echoes through an empty corridor. The guard hears it as a sudden noise in the darkness. In reality, it may be nothing more than the structure adjusting to temperature. Another belief claims strange rules exist because previous guards encountered something they could not explain. Narrative usually includes a mysterious predecessor who disappeared or quit abruptly. This idea spreads because turnover in security work is real. Lesser known fact. Private security positions often experience annual turnover rates above 50%, especially in overnight shifts. High turnover means stories pass between workers who barely know each other. Each retelling adds speculation. The rule list becomes a relic of rumors, but most procedures come from far more ordinary causes. Insurance companies demand documented safety policies. Property managers respond by writing rules for every possible scenario. Lesser known fact. Insurance audits for large commercial properties often require written protocols for fire, theft, medical emergencies, and trespassing incidents. A rule might sound strange when isolated. For example, never enter the loading dock alone after midnight. Without context, it sounds like superstition, but there may be a very practical reason. Loading docks attract trespassers. Truck drivers occasionally arrive at wrong hours. Homeless individuals sometimes shelter in cargo areas. Lesser known fact. Logistic zones of malls often experience higher rates of nighttime trespassing than the retail floors themselves, so the rule exists to protect the guard. The myth says the Rule protects the guard from monsters. The truth says it protects the guard from unpredictable human behavior. Another common claim says remote malls hide secret areas where strange events occur. Hidden corridors, locked maintenance tunnels, rooms nobody talks about. The idea feels believable because large buildings do contain areas the public never sees. Lesser known fact, major shopping malls can include kilometers of service corridors behind stores, allowing employees to move goods without using public hallways. To and Nougat. These areas look like a maze. Long white corridors, metal doors with coded locks, fluorescent lights buzzing. Quietly, it is easy to imagine something lurking there. But those corridors exist for logistics. They allow trucks to unload goods, workers to move inventory, and maintenance teams to access equipment. Lesser known fact, large retail complexes often include centralized HVAC plants, electrical substations, and water systems hidden beneath or behind the mall. These mechanical areas produce constant noise. Pumps hum, fans rotate, pipes vibrate slightly as water moves through them. In an empty building, those sounds travel surprisingly far. Another myth says strange rules exist because guards must avoid certain locations at certain times. Stories often mention escalators that should not be used after midnight, or elevators that should never be entered alone. At first glance, the rules sound theatrical, but the explanation usually lies in maintenance. Lesser known fact, escalators and elevators require scheduled inspection cycles, sometimes leaving equipment temporarily unsafe during nighttime repair. When a mechanic disables a system, a guard might receive a simple instruction: do not use this elevator after midnight, without explanation. The rule feels mysterious, but the real cause is maintenance. The same applies to lighting. People often claim lights flicker because something supernatural moves through the building. Lesser known fact, commercial lighting systems sometimes use automated power saving cycles, switching off sections of lighting after hours. A guard walking through the corridor might trigger motion sensors. Lights turn on suddenly behind them. In a silent mall, that moment feels eerie. The myth of supernatural presence grows stronger. Another belief says security guards must follow strange timing rules. For example, checking certain areas every hour exactly, or avoiding specific hallways after a certain time. These procedures sound ritualistic, but they exist for accountability. Lesser known fact, patrol schedules are often monitored through electronic checkpoints that record timestamps. When a guard scans a device, property managers use these logs to verify patrol coverage. The guard is not performing a ritual, he is creating a record. Imagine a scenario where the myth fails. A guard ignores patrolled checkpoints because the rules seem pointless. Later, a theft occurs. Without the timestamp log, investigators cannot confirm whether the guard inspected the area. Lesser known fact, documentation of patrol activity can influence insurance claims and liability investigations after incidents. Another myth claims strange rules protect guards from something seen on security cameras. This story usually includes a mysterious figure appearing at night. People assume security cameras revealed hidden threats, but cameras introduce their own problems. Lesser known fact, older surveillance systems often record low-resolution footage that can create misleading visual artifacts. Shadows appear distorted. Moving insects look enormous when close to the lens. Compression errors create flickering shapes. A guard watching such footage late at night may interpret these artifacts as movement. Rumors begin. The rule list grows longer. Another claim says remote malls attract paranormal activity because they were built on strange land, burial grounds, abandoned towns, forgotten history. The narrative sounds dramatic, but commercial property selection usually follows far more practical criteria. Lesser known fact, Developers choose mall locations primarily based on traffic patterns, population density, and road accessibility. Land with highway access and affordable costs becomes ideal. Any unusual local history becomes irrelevant compared with logistics. Another belief says strange noises means someone else is inside the building. In some cases, that fear is justified. Large buildings rarely remain completely empty. Maintenance workers sometimes arrive unexpectedly. Cleaning crews may work overnight. Lesser known fact. Cleaning operations for major retail complexes often begin hours after closing time in May, involve dozens of workers moving through different zones. A guard hearing movement in another corridor might assume intrusion. In reality, it could be a janitor pushing a cart, but communication failures sometimes create confusion. Another myth claims the rules exist because guards must avoid certain security cameras. Stories suggest cameras capture things people should not see. The real issue is privacy and legal compliance. Lesser known fact. Surveillance systems must follow strict legal restrictions in many jurisdictions, preventing cameras from recording certain areas, like employee restrooms or private offices. Rules might instruct guards not to access particular camera feeds. The reason is legal protection, not secrecy. Another story says guards should never interact with figures seen outside after closing. The myth assumes these figures are something supernatural, but nighttime trespassing occurs frequently. Lesser known fact. Abandoned or quiet commercial spaces sometimes attract urban explorers who intentionally enter properties after hours. These individuals may wander through parking lots or loading areas. Security guards are trained to observe rather than confront immediately. The rule might say, report suspicious individuals instead of approaching. Again, the instruction protects the guard. Another belief says remote malls operate with minimal staff because nothing happens there. That assumption is inaccurate. Large properties require continuous monitoring. Lesser known fact. A single shopping mall may contain hundreds of entry points, including emergency exits, service doors, and roof access hatches. Securing all of them requires systematic patrols. The rule list becomes long because the building itself is complex. Now step back from the individual myths. Notice how they all share a common pattern. A rule appears strange when the reason behind it disappears. A guard receives instructions without the history that produced them. Rumors fill the gap. Lesser known fact. Workplace folklore often develops when institutional knowledge is lost due to employee turnover. New employees inherit procedures, but not explanations. Stories replace facts. Another deeper force shapes these rules. Corporate liability. Property owners must demonstrate that safety precautions exist. Even unlikely risks require documentation. Lesser known fact. Legal risk assessments for commercial buildings often examine hundreds of potential hazards, including fire response times, evacuation routes, and structural maintenance records. Each hazard produces another rule. The guard becomes the final layer of that system. A person walking the corridors, verifying that everything remains stable. This is not the glamorous job imagined in horror stories. It is routine, slow patrols, quiet observation, documentation of small details. Lesser known fact. Incident reports written by guards often include precise timestamps, weather conditions, and descriptions of minor maintenance issues. Those reports help property managers track problems. A leak in pipe, a malfunction in light, a door that fails to lock properly. Each detail prevents larger problems later. The strange list of rules therefore reveals something about how modern systems operate. Large buildings depend on procedures rather than intuition. Every incident produces a new instruction. Over years, those instructions accumulate. The list grows longer. Without explanation, it begins to look mysterious. But the mystery comes from missing context, not from monsters. The final truth becomes clear when we trace the chain of cause and effect. A building opens to thousands of visitors each day. Complex systems of electricity, climate control, logistics, and security keep it functioning. Occasional incidents occur. Management writes rules to prevent those incidents from repeating. New guards read the rules without knowing the past events behind them. Lesser known fact: safety manuals for large facilities sometimes grow to hundreds of pages after decades of operation. That accumulation creates the strange lists people share online. A guard arrives at night. The building feels empty. The rule sheet sits on the desk. It reads like a warning from another world. But the real story is simpler. Each rule is the echo of a problem that once happened. Not a monster, just history. In a typical regional shopping complex, the night guard responsible for the entire property may oversee more than 500,000 square feet of indoor space and several acres of parking area. By the end, you understand why the strange rule list of a remote mall guard is not evidence of something supernatural, but a record of how complex systems fail. People imagine the first night of that job in a certain way. A new guard walks into a quiet security office. The mall is closed. The fluorescent lights hum softly overhead. On the desk lies a sheet of paper filled with rules that seem strangely specific. Do not enter the west corridor after 2 a.m. Ignore alarms from Unit B17. Unless verified twice. If the motion sensor in storage hallway 3 activates, wait exactly 5 minutes before checking. Lesser known fact: many commercial alarm systems trigger thousands of false alerts every year, especially in large buildings with aging sensors. Without that background, the rules feel eerie. With the background, they look practical. The popular belief says strange instructions appear because someone encountered something unexplainable. That explanation spreads easily because people are uncomfortable with empty buildings. Humans evolved in environments where darkness meant vulnerability. Lesser known fact: research in environmental psychology shows that large, empty interior spaces amplify anxiety responses in humans, especially when lighting is minimal. So when a guard hears a noise in a hallway the size of an airport corridor, the mind searches for explanations. Rumors grow, and rumors turn into myths. Another story often told about remote mall security says the guard is completely alone. The image is powerful. One person standing against the unknown in a silent structure. But that assumption rarely reflects the reality of property operations. Lesser known fact: many malls maintain remote monitoring centers that watch camera feeds from multiple locations simultaneously. Even if a guard appears alone on site, someone may be observing the property through cameras from another city. That system changes how security rules are written. The guard on location becomes the physical response. The monitoring team becomes the observer. Rules may instruct the guard to delay action until confirmation arrives from the remote team. To someone unfamiliar with the system, that delay might feel ominous, but the real reason is verification. Alarm systems fail frequently. Motion detectors respond to dust, insects, or temperature changes. Lesser known fact: small insects crawling across infrared motion sensors have been documented to trigger alarms in commercial systems. Imagine the rule again. If the motion sensor activates, wait 5 minutes before checking. It sounds suspicious, but the waiting period allows the monitoring system to determine whether the alert repeats. If the signal disappears quickly, the cause was probably environmental. If it continues, the guard investigates. The rule is not a warning about monsters. It is a filter for false alarms. Another myth says remote malls become dangerous because criminals target them after closing us. Belief has some truth. Large empty buildings do attract attention from thieves, but the threat rarely resembles what people imagine. Lesser known fact: Many commercial burglaries occur during business hours when crowds provide cover, not during the quiet of midnight. Professional thieves often avoid closed buildings because alarms and surveillance become more obvious. Nighttime threats are more mundane, trespassers looking for shelter, teenagers exploring abandoned corridors, occasional vandalism, rules about specific hallways often relate to those patterns. For example, a rule might say, never open the rear loading gate for anyone claiming to be a late delivery. That instruction sounds strange at first. Why would someone arrive with a delivery after midnight? But it has happened before. Lesser known fact. Cargo theft groups sometimes attempt social engineering tactics, pretending to be authorized drivers to gain access to storage areas. So the rule becomes permanent. The guard does not open the gate, even if the story sounds convincing. Another belief claims that certain areas of a mall must remain locked at night because something happened there. Stories mention abandoned stores with lights that turn on unexpectedly, or security doors that slam without explanation. The reality often lies in the infrastructure of the building. Large commercial properties contain complicated electrical systems. Lesser known fact, electrical panels controlling different sections of a mall may be spread across dozens of locked maintenance rooms. If one circuit experiences a fault, lights may flicker or activate unexpectedly. A guard who does not know the layout might interpret the behavior as something mysterious, but electricians understand the system. A maintenance log might explain the pattern clearly. Another myth centers on security cameras. People assume cameras reveal everything happening in the building, but surveillance systems have limitations. Lesser known fact, many cameras installed in earlier generations of security networks record at frame rates as low as 10 to 15 frames per second. Movement between frames can appear jerky or unnatural. Shadows stretch across the screen in distorted shapes. A person walking through the corridor might appear to move strangely to an inexperienced observer. That footage looks unsettling. In reality, it is simply compression, artifacts, and lighting. Another story claims security rules exist because guards once disappeared while investigating strange events. This dramatic narrative spreads easily, but there are simpler explanations for missing personnel. Lesser-known fact, security shifts are sometimes staffed by contract employees who may leave a job abruptly without formal notice, especially in temporary positions. When a worker stops returning calls, rumors begin. Someone says the guard encountered something in the building. Someone else adds details. Over time, the story becomes legend, but employment records usually show ordinary turnover. Another belief says the list of rules grows longer because each guard adds new warnings on reality. The opposite is more common. Rules originate from management, not guards. Lesser known fact, corporate risk departments often require formal review and approval before operational procedures can be changed. Individual guards rarely have authority to modify official guidelines, so the list reflects institutional decisions, and those decisions often follow legal advice. For example, a rule might say, never attempt to physically detain trespassers. At first glance, that sounds passive, but the reason lies in liability. Lesser-known fact, private security guards often have limited legal authority compared with police officers. Depending on jurisdiction, if a guard injures someone during a confrontation, the property owner may face legal consequences. So the safest policy is observation. In reporting, the rule protects the company. It also protects the guard. Another myth suggests remote malls feel haunted because they are enormous empty spaces. There is some truth to the sensation. Architecture affects sound in unusual ways. Lesser known fact, long corridors with smooth surfaces, can create echo patterns that make footsteps sound closer or farther than they really are. A guard walking through the hallway may hear reflections of their own movement. The brain interprets the sound as someone. Following. Fear grows quickly in quiet environments. Another claim says security offices contain strange monitoring equipment that guards are told never to touch. Stories describe blinking panels and mysterious consoles. The explanation is simpler. Large buildings contain many technical systems: fire alarms, sprinkler controls, energy management, computers. Lesser known fact. Fire suppression systems in commercial buildings are often linked to centralized control panels that require trained technicians to operate safely. A guard may receive strict instructions not to adjust those systems, not because they are mysterious, because improper operation could trigger a built-in wired alarm or damage equipment. Another myth involves elevators. Stories often say elevators in remote malls move on their own late at night, but elevators are automated machines. They run diagnostic cycles, even when empty. Lesser known fact. Modern elevators periodically return to designated floors automatically during standby mode to prepare for the next use. If a guard sees the elevator doors open on an empty floor, it can feel eerie, but the system is functioning normally. Now consider the pattern behind all these stories. Each myth begins with a rule that appears strange. Someone reads the rule without understanding the system that produced it. The mind fills the gap with imagination, but systems create rules for practical reasons. Every instruction reflects a past problem, a false alarm, a maintenance issue, a legal concern. Lesser known fact. Safety procedures often evolve after incident investigations that analyze small failures before they become disasters. Those investigations rarely become public knowledge, so the rules remain while the stories disappear. Another deeper factor shapes the perception of remote security work. Isolation. Night shifts disrupt normal human routines. Lesser known fact. Working overnight can alter circadian rhythms and increase feelings of alertness mixed with fatigue, which sometimes heightens sensitivity to unusual stimuli. A guard sitting alone in a silent office may become hyper-aware of every sound. Small noises feel significant. Shadows seem larger. Stories grow from that psychological state, but when investigators examine the building systems, they usually find ordinary causes: air ducts shifting with temperature, sensors reacting to dust, electrical circuits cycling through maintenance checks. Nothing supernatural, just complexity. The hidden driver behind the strange rule lists is not fear of monsters. It is the reality of managing large infrastructure. A modern shopping mall is closer to a small city than a simple building. Thousands of lights, miles of wiring, dozens of mechanical systems. Security procedures attempt to keep all of it stable. Lesser known fact. Some large malls consume as much electricity as a small town during peak operating hours. When that much equipment runs under one roof, unusual events are inevitable. Rules appear to manage those events. The final truth becomes clearer when we connect the chain. A large building operates with complicated technology. Occasional incidents create new safety policies. Over years, those policies accumulate into long lists of procedures. New guards arrive without the historical context of each rule. The instructions sound mysterious, stories spread, but the real explanation is simply the memory of past problems written in procedural language. A remote mall at night feels strange because humans are not used to buildings that large being empty. The guard reads the rule sheet and imagines hidden dangers. In reality, the rules describe something far less dramatic. They are the operational history of the building. Every strange instruction is a footprint of something that went wrong once. Not a monster, just a system trying to prevent the same mistake from happening again.